You have probably heard of the Magna Carta before. Maybe it's just something you nodded your head to without knowing exactly what it is. Or maybe you do know what it is, but you don't know a lot about the real reasons behind its creation. Or maybe you know everything about the Magna Carta and you don't need me to tell you about it. But do you know that after we talk about the Magna Carta today, we will learn 10 new words in context that you can add to your active vocabulary bank? Well, I bet that last one is at least useful to everyone listening right now. This is your host, Danny, and this is English Plus Podcast, and we're here today to talk about the spirit of 1215, the year when the Magna Carta was created. We will talk about the circumstances surrounding the creation of this historical document, and we will talk about 10 new words in context that we will learn and add to our vocabulary bank. How about that? Let's see what these words are. These words are redress, inviolable, provocation, embolden, accost, duress, acquiesce, mollify, obviate, and extant. These are our words. And remember, what are we going to talk about today? It's the Magna Carta. It's the spirit of 1215. But before we start, let me remind you that you can find a lot of opportunities to practice what you're learning on my website, EnglishPlusPodcast.com. The link in the description will take you to the custom post I created for this episode where you will have all the chances you need to practice what you're learning. And furthermore, for my lifelong learners on Patreon, you will get a special PDF practice worksheet where you can practice even more. And not only for this episode, but you can practice the previous 4 episodes so that you make sure that you never forget anything you learn here on English Plus Podcast. And there's also the assignment. And in the assignment, you will get the chance to write something. I will read that and give you my personalized feedback for every single submission that you make within the week, of course. All of that is available to my lifelong learners on Patreon. What are you waiting for? There's another link in the description that will take you to my Patreon page where you can become a lifelong learner and get this benefit for this episode, but that's not everything. You will have access to all my premium audio series and the courses that are starting very soon. The very first exclusive course that will start on English Plus Podcast is the Odyssey. You can check it out. It's on the homepage. There's the introduction of the course. Check it out and see if you're interested, and I bet you'll be interested. All you have to do is to become a lifelong learner on Patreon, and you will have access to all this good stuff. And now, without further ado, let's start talking about the spirit of 1215. The English barons who met at St. Albans outside London in 1213 cared little for the rights of the commoner. They only sought some redress for the excessive taxation, military service, and other demands King John was making on them. However, the article they drafted in 1213 and were approved by King John 2 years later eventually formed the foundation of our constitutional government. The revolutionary notions that all people are equal and that they possess certain inviolable rights beyond the power of ruler or church were born at this meeting. The feudal society of 13th century England demanded a baron's loyalty to the king in return for land and a large share of the country's wealth. When King John came to power in 1199, however, he began making what the barons felt were excessive demands for military service and taxes. Perhaps an even more serious provocation was King John's refusal to consult his barons before altering accepted feudal laws and customs. Such behavior might have been allowable in other circumstances, but English war losses to France had weakened the king's position and therefore emboldened the barons to draft 63 articles guaranteeing them certain rights. Once the articles were drafted, the barons accosted the king, demanding that he issue the article as a royal charter to be distributed throughout the kingdom. Under the duress of a faltering war abroad and civil strife at home, King John had little choice but to acquiesce to the barons' demands. So, to mollify his nobility and keep his throne, King John approved the charter known as the Magna Carta in June 1215. One article stated that the church should be free from royal interference. Another stated that the king could not demand additional money from the barons without first consulting them. Yet another said that no one could be denied his property except by the lawful judgment of his equals. So, in his effort to obviate a civil war, King John established democratic principles that the colonists carried to America several hundred years later. In a very real sense, the spirit of 1776 got its start in 1215. Only 4 original copies of the Magna Carta are extant today, all in England. 2 are in the British Library, 1 in Salisbury Cathedral, and 1 in Lincoln Cathedral. So, that was about the Magna Carta, and that was, more importantly, about the spirit of 1215 and the circumstances that led to the creation of such a historical document. I hope you learned something you didn't know about before about the Magna Carta, and now it is time to learn words. And this time, in this episode, I'm going to introduce something special. Before I tell you everything you need to know about the words, let you guess the meanings of the words by yourselves. So, are you ready to do that? It's gonna be fun. You're going to guess the meanings of those words in context, but don't worry if you can't guess the meaning of all the words, because we're going to talk about them in detail as we usually do. But first, let's see if you're going to figure out the meanings on your own. And that's coming next. Don't go away. So our very first word is redress. R-E-D-R-E-S-S, redress. Before I ask you the question, let me tell you how we use this word in context. We said they only sought some redress from the excessive taxation, military service, and other demands King John was making on them. They only sought some redress from the excessive taxation. Which word or words could best replace redress in this context? Does it mean punishment, increased interest, satisfaction for some wrong, or amusement? So, is it punishment, increased interest, satisfaction for some wrong, or amusement? Think about it, and I hope you get the right answer. So for those who chose satisfaction for some wrong, congratulations, because that is exactly what redress means. But don't worry, we'll talk more about redress after we finish the questions. Now for the next word, inviolable, I-N-V-I-O-L-A-B-L-E, inviolable. Let me just tell you how we used it in context first, and then I will ask the question. The revolutionary notions that all people are equal and that they possess certain inviolable rights beyond the power of ruler or church were born at this meeting. So here we're talking about certain inviolable rights. When we say inviolable, what does that mean? An inviolable right is rarely exercised? Or is it something that cannot be taken away? Or is it something that is not supported by law? Or is it something that is granted by the courts? What is the meaning of inviolable? Think about it, and I'll be right back with the answer. Well, for those of you who chose that an inviolable right is one that cannot be taken away, congratulations, because that is exactly what inviolable means. That was our second word or second question. Let me move on and talk about the third word and our third question for today, and that is provocation. P-R-O-V-O-C-A-T-I-O-N, provocation. Let me just remind you with the context. We said perhaps an even more serious provocation was King John's refusal to consult his barons before altering accepted feudal laws and customs. So here we're talking about even more serious provocation was the refusal to consult with barons. Now, when we say provocation, which word can best replace provocation in this context? Is it a source of anger? Is it religious belief? Is it idle thought or military action? What are we talking about here? What's the meaning of provocation? Think about it, and I'll be right back with the answer. Well, for those of you who chose source of anger, you're absolutely right about that. That is the meaning of provocation in this specific context. So congratulations for guessing the right answer. And now we move on to the next word, embolden. E-M-B-O-L-D-E-N, embolden. How do we use that in context? We said such behavior might have been allowable in other circumstances, but English war losses to France had weakened the king's position and therefore emboldened the barons to draft 63 articles guaranteeing them certain rights. So something or all these circumstances emboldened the barons. Now, which word or words could best replace emboldened in this context? Can we replace it with tricked, forced, strongly encouraged, or frightened? Which word or words could best replace emboldened in this context? Think about it, and I'll come back with the answer. Don't go away. For those of you who chose strongly encouraged, you're absolutely right. That's the right answer. And now for the next word. The next word is accost, A-C-C-O-S-T. How do we use that in context? We said once the articles were drafted, the barons accosted the king, demanding that he issue the articles as a royal charter to be distributed throughout the kingdom. That's how we used it in context. So what's the meaning of accost here? If you accost an individual, what do? Do you confuse him or her? Do you punish him or her severely? Do you entertain him or her? Do you approach him or her angrily? Which one is the right answer? Think about it, and I'll come back to you with the answer very shortly. For those of you who chose approach him or her angrily, you're absolutely right, because that is the meaning of accost in this context. Now we'll move on to the next word, duress, D-U-R-E-S-S. How do we use that? We said, under the duress of a faltering war abroad and civil strife at home, King John had little choice but to acquiesce to the barons' demands. So what's the meaning of duress in this context? Which word or words could we use to replace duress in this context? Is it supervision? Is it threat? Is it pleasant surroundings? Or is it a sense of duty? Think about it. I'll come back to you with the answer. Now, for those of you who thought that the best word to replace duress in this context is threat, you're absolutely right, because that is exactly what it means in this context. And now we will move to the next word, acquiesce. This word is very tricky to spell, so pay attention. It is A-C-Q-U-I-E-S-C-E, acquiesce. I know, it sounds different from the way it is written, but some words in English are like that. So it is A-C-Q-U-I-E-S-C-E, and it is pronounced acquiesce. So it's the same context I just told you about, but let me remind you, we said under the duress of a faltering war abroad and civil strife at home, King John had little choice but to acquiesce to the barons' demands. What does that mean? If you acquiesce to something, what does that mean? Do you ignore it completely? Do you boast about it? Do you gaze at it lovingly? Or do you quietly agree to it? Which one is the right answer, do you think? Think about it, and I'll come back with the answer very shortly. So for those of you who thought about the very last one, if you acquiesce to something, you quietly agree to it, you're absolutely right, because that is the right answer. And that takes me to the next word, mollify, M-O-L-L-I-F-Y. We continued on by saying, so to mollify his nobility and keep his throne, King John approved the charter known as the Magna Carta in June 1215. So to mollify his nobility, M-O-L-L-I-F-Y. What's the meaning of mollify? Let's find out. Which word or words could best replace mollify in this context? Does it mean to soothe or comfort? Does it mean to make angry? Does it mean to insult? Or does it mean to confuse or bewilder? Which one is the right answer, do you think? Think about it, and I'll come very shortly with the answer. Now, congratulations to every single one of you who thought that soothe or comfort was the right answer, because it is. It is the right answer. Mollify has the same meaning of soothe or comfort. And now let's move to the next word, and this word is obviate. It's Obviate. Obviate. How do we use that in context? We said, so in his effort to obviate a civil war, King John established democratic principles that the colonists carried to America several hundred years later to obviate a civil war. Now, if you obviate a risk, what does it mean? Do you increase it? Do you prevent it? Do you defeat it? Or do you embrace it? Which one is it? Think about it, and I'll come back with the answer very shortly. Now, for those of you who thought that it is prevented, to prevent something, that's to obviate a civil war, you're absolutely right. That's the answer. Now we come to the very last one of our words for today. But remember, we're not done. I'm still going to talk about the words as I usually do. But this is just something for you to be part of this episode. Not for me just to keep talking and you're just listening. Here, you're part of the episode. And now for the last word, extant. It's E-X-T-A-N-T. Extant. How do we use that in context? We said only 4 original copies of the Magna Carta are extant today, all in England. Now, if something is extant, it is what? Is it misplaced, illegible, still in existence, or worshipped? So which one is it? Think about the answer, which I will come back to you with it very shortly. Now, for all of you who chose still in existence, congratulations, because that is the right answer. So I wonder, how many words did you get right? Was it 5, 6, 7, or maybe all of them? Even if you got all of them, don't go away, because we're still going to talk in more detail about these words in context. So that's what we're going to do next. Don't go away, stick around, because there is even more to learn from this episode. So let's start with the very first word, redress. We said the English barons who met at St. Albans outside London in 1213 cared little for the rights of the commoner. They only sought some redress from the excessive taxation, military service, and other demands King John was making on them. So if you redress something, such as a wrong or a complaint, what do? You do something to correct it or to improve things for the person who has been badly treated. It's like to amend, to rectify, to remedy, to counteract. That's the meaning of redress. That was our first word. What about the second word, inviolable? Inviolable, we used it in context and we said the revolutionary notions that all people are equal and that they possess certain inviolable rights beyond the power of ruler or church were born at this meeting. When we talk about something inviolable, especially we're talking about a law or principle. If a law or principle is inviolable, you must not break it. We're talking about something close to being sacred or holy or hallowed. Now, of course, I'm not saying that all laws are like that. Some laws need to be broken, and it was a good thing that they were broken. But when we use the word inviolable, we're talking about something that you must not break. And that was our second word. Now for the next word, provocation. How do we use that in context? We said perhaps an even more serious provocation was King John's refusal to consult his barons before altering accepted feudal laws and customs. Now, if you describe a person's action as provocation or a provocation, you mean that it is a reason for someone else to react angrily, violently, or emotionally. It's the cause for this anger, the reason, the motivation behind this anger. When we talk about provocation, we're not talking about something positive. It does not create a positive attitude in the other person. It actually drives this person angry. That is the meaning of provocation. Remember that. And now for the next word, embolden. Remember how we used that in context? We said such behavior might have been allowable in other circumstances, but English war losses to France had weakened the king's position and therefore emboldened the barons to draft 63 articles guaranteeing them certain rights. Well, what does that mean? If you are emboldened by something, It makes you feel confident enough to behave in a particular way, especially to challenge some authority or some ruler, like in this case, a king. Emboldens, it gives you strength, it strengthens you, it encourages you to do something because you feel stronger. But it's not only about strength, remember, it makes you feel confident enough to behave in this way. All right, that's the meaning of embolden. And the next word is accost. Remember, it is spelled A-C-C-O-S-T, accost. How do we use that in context? We said once the articles were drafted, the barons accosted the king, demanding that he issue the articles as a royal charter to be distributed throughout the kingdom. Now, if someone accosts another person, especially a stranger, they stop them or go up to them and speak to them in a way that seems rude or threatening. Now, here, of course, the king was no stranger, but they talked to him in a rude way because they were emboldened, remember? They were emboldened to speak to their king this way. And of course, that was because England was losing in the war and the king's position was so weak, so that emboldened the barons to talk to him and demand things from their king. They demanded that he issue the articles as a royal charter to be distributed throughout the kingdom. And they accosted him. They didn't talk to him nicely, not at all. They confronted him. They challenged him. And that was kind of unheard of back then in 1215. But these were the right circumstances for the Magna Carta to be born. Maybe not for the same intentions we believe in today, but it was a good thing to happen back then, even if it happened for mostly other reasons. But it's a good thing that it happened. It's a good thing that we have a charter like this. And that was our word accost. What's the next word? It's duress, D-U-R-E-S-S. How do we use that in context? We said, under the duress of a faltering war abroad and civil strife at home, King John had little choice but to acquiesce to the barons' demands. So what is the duress? To do something under duress means to do it because someone forces you to do it or threatens you to do it. So you do something under pressure, under threat. It's not because you want to do it. It's not because you would do it if you had no pressure. And this pressure was actually useful because King John later, and that's our very next word, had little choice but to acquiesce to the barons' demands. Now, acquiesce is our next word, and I will remind you again with the spelling of this word because it is kind of challenging, as I told you earlier. It is A-C-Q-U-I-E-S-C-E, acquiesce. I know. It is spelled in a way and pronounced in a different way, but it is acquiesce. What does it mean? It said, under the duress of a faltering war abroad and civil strife at home, King John had little choice but to acquiesce to the barons' demands. What does that mean? Does that mean he said yes because he liked it? Not really. He had to. If you acquiesce in something, you agree to do what someone wants, or you accept what they do even though you may not agree with it. So it's not a big secret that King John didn't want to do that. He didn't really agree with all this nonsense, for him, of course, that people should be the same and whatever, and there's no absolute power for the king, and all this stuff that was written in the Magna Carta, that was nonsense to King John. He had little choice but to acquiesce. He agreed not because he liked it, but because he kind of had to. And that is the meaning of acquiesce. Remember, it's not just to say to agree with something or to accept something. No, to accept or agree, maybe you like it, maybe you agree with it, and it's not a problem. But to acquiesce, that means you kind of give in because you have little choice, like King John here. And that was our word. And our next word is mollify, M-O-L-L-I-F-Y. How do we use that in context? We said, so to mollify his nobility and keep his throne, King John approved the charter known as the Magna Carta in June 1215. Now, if you mollify someone, you do or say something to make them less upset or angry. You pacify this person. You try to soothe this person, to quiet, to calm this person. That's the meaning of mollify, and that's exactly what King John did, to mollify his nobility and keep his throne, obviously, not because he cared about them. He did not. But the point is he wanted to keep his throne, and he had angry nobility behind him, and without his nobility, He had no support at all, so he needed them to mollify his nobility and keep his throne. King John approved the charter. And that was mollify, ladies and gentlemen. And now for the next word, obviate. Obviate, it's O-B-V-I-A-T-E, but we don't stress a lot on the B, so obviate. You kind of pronounce it, you kind of don't. So, obviate. How do we use that in context? We says, so in his effort to obviate a civil war, King John established democratic principles that the colonists carried to America several hundred years later. So in a very real sense, the spirit of 1776 got its start in 1215. But back to our word, obviate. What does it mean? To obviate something such as a problem or a need means to remove it or make it unnecessary, kind of like avoid or avert or prevent it from happening. So to obviate a civil war, it's like to prevent a civil war. And now for our very last word for today's episode, that is extant, E-X-T-A-N-T. How do we use that in context? We said only 4 original copies of the Magna Carta are extant today, all in England. 2 are in the British Library, 1 is in Salisbury Cathedral, and 1 is in Lincoln Cathedral. What do we mean when we say something is extant? If something is extant, it is still in existence in spite of being very old. I mean, the Magna Carta, we're talking about something that is 800 years plus old, and it's still in existence. It is extant. That's the word, and that was the last word. Let me remind you again, we talked about 10 very interesting words. I will have to admit that these words are kind of formal, but remember, you need formal words sometimes. It's not always about slang words and words that we use only in conversation. No, you need some words because you will need English not only to speak, but to write as well. And if you use some smart words, some strong words here and there, I mean, not a lot at the same time, that will make your writing much better. And that will make your English much better. But let me remind you, these words were redress, inviolable, provocation, embolden, accost, duress, acquiesce, mollify, obviate, and extant. And our topic for today was the Magna Carta and the spirit of 1215. I hope you liked our topic for today and you learned a lot in today's episode. Don't forget, there is a step you can take to take your English with it to the next level, and that is by just clicking on this link you can find in the description of the episode. Go to my website, EnglishPlusPodcast.com. There is a custom post I created for this episode where you can practice to your heart's content. There are interactive activities that you can use for your own benefit to practice what you've learned in this episode and make sure these words stay in your active vocabulary bank forever. And if you want to take it even further, you can become a lifelong learner on Patreon. And by doing that, you will have access to the PDF practice worksheet and the weekly assignment based on this episode. And of course, there are a lot of other things you can get. The premium audio series, the exclusive online courses on the website, and more. Check it out. You can just go see the benefits and see for yourself if it's worth it. But I promise you, it's definitely worth it. Anyway, the least you can do is to go to the website and practice the words that we talked about in today's episode. With that being said, that'll be everything for today. This is your host, Danny. Thank you very much for listening to another episode from English Plus Podcast. I will see you next time.